The second part of absolute values is learning how to graph those. So we have a 5-step process that we're going to follow. So step 1 is to find the vertex, which is also known as the top or the bottom of the V shape. So how are we going to do this? What we're going to do is we're going to look inside our absolute value bars and ask what value of x would make this expression equal to 0. And so that number is the x coordinate of our vertex. And what number is that in the problem that we are looking at? And that number would be x to be -5. So you're just looking at the inside of our equation, and our equation is that y equals -3 x plus 5 plus 2. So you're just looking right inside that box. So -5 would make that part 0. So that would be the x coordinate of our vertex. Next, what we're going to do is make a table with the x coordinate we found in the middle of our table. So we're going to put -5 here in the middle, and I'm going to go ahead and kind of circle that so that we know that this is our middle, this is our vertex, and we're going to put 2 values in smaller than that and 2 values in bigger than that. So -6 and -7 will be 2 numbers smaller than that, and -4 and -3 are going to be 2 numbers bigger than that. Typically, it's just easiest if you pick the numbers directly next to those vertex values. So step 3 is going to be to put that original x value into the equation and solve for y. So basically this is just going to fill in our y tables just like we would with any equation. So we're going to go ahead and plug in our -5 into our equation. So I'd have -3, -5 plus 5, and then plus 2. So I get -3 and then 0 on the inside plus 2. So -3 times 0 is 0 plus 2, making my y coordinate there 2. Okay, and then I'll go ahead and now I'll go down to the -6 here. So now I've got -3 and then -6 plus 5 and then plus 2. So I've got -3 on the outside. -6 plus 5 is -1 plus 2. Then that gives me -3 times 1 because the absolute value of -1 is 1 plus 2. So -3 times 1 is -3 plus 2. So that gives me a -1. So that gives me -6, -1. And now I need a value for -7. So I'm running out of space. So I'll do that up here. So I've got -3, -7 plus 5, and then plus 2. So that's -3 and then -2 plus 2. And then -3 times the absolute value of 2 is +2 plus 2. -3 times 2 is -6 plus 2. So now I'm looking at -4 for that final answer. So now I have a value of -4. So if I look at the second directions here, all of those y values are going to be repeated on the other side of my vertex. So if I was 1 away from the -5, so the -6 will be repeated to the -4, okay, because -6 was 1 away from -5, so it's 1 away on the other side. And then the -7 will be repeated to the -3, so then the -4 will repeat over there. So kind of the same properties of your parabola will be same true for an absolute value. So now we have our table complete, and now all we need to do is pick 2 values above or below the x-coordinate and plug those into the equation to solve for y, and those will be the same too for the other coordinates, which we did. And now all we have to do is plug them, plot them, and connect them with our straight edge. So we've got -5, -2, -2, and then -4, -1, and -3, -4. Oops, I did the first one wrong. -5, +2. There we go. And -3, -4 is here. And then those reflect over here as -6, -1, and -7, -4. And it is a straight V pattern. So all of your absolutes will be that same V shape, and then that vertex that we found, that first one, This -5, -2, that's your high point, and then the other ones reflect around. Okay, so kind of a long process, but hopefully as we get the hang of it, it'll go a little bit quicker. So we'll try the next one, x minus 7 minus 3. So again, we want to find our vertex, and we want to put it into an xy table. So the first thing we want to do is look at the inside of our absolute value bars and say what would make that inside 7. I'm sorry, the inside 0, which would be 7 because 7 minus 7 is 0. So that makes this part 7, and that part here would be our vertex. So I'll label that V for our vertex. And then we want to go ahead and pick two values smaller. So I'll do 6 and 5, and two numbers bigger, so 8 and 9. And then we want to go ahead and plug those into our equation to fill out our y values. So I'll do absolute value of 7 minus 3. So that gives me 0 minus 3. So 7, -3 is that coordinate. Now I'll go ahead and do the 6. So I've got absolute value of 6 minus 7 minus 3. So absolute value of -1 minus 3 is 1 minus 3, so -2. And then I'll go ahead and do 5. So now I've got absolute value of 5 minus 7 minus 3. So absolute value of -2 minus 3. So that gives me 2 minus 3, which is -1. So now I can reflect those values around, remember, because the vertex is in the middle. So 6 will reflect over with 8, so that gives me -2. And the 5 will reflect over to the 9, so -1. So now all I need to do is plot my points. So I've got 7, -3. And this is my vertex. So this should either be my high point or my low point, depending on which direction my absolute value is opening. So then I've got 6, -2, and 5, -1, and then 8, -2, and 9, -1. So this one is opening up, and that is the straight V. If we remember what domain and range is, domain is your x values. So as I look at my x values on left and right, I would see that everywhere. So I would say x equals all real values here. My range would be my vertical one. So I see that I have a low point at -3, and my graph is going above. So I'd say y is greater than or equal to -3. So a good review of domain and range looking at these graphs. Number 2, again, let's start with our vertex here. Make ourselves a nice xy table here, looking at the absolute value, okay, and saying what about that would make the inside 0. So what plus 4 is 0? Well, -4. Oops, not 0, but just what makes it 0. So this right here will be my vertex. Okay, so I'll label that with my vertex. I'll go ahead and I'll pick two numbers smaller, so -5 and -6. Two numbers bigger, so -3 and -2. And again, it's just easiest if you pick those values that are right next to it. So now we'll go ahead and do the math to finish our y values. So plug in 4, so I've got 2 times the absolute value of -4 plus 4 minus 6. So I've got 2 times 0 minus 6, so that gives me -6. So that is my vertex in the middle. Now if I go ahead and do my -5, I've got 2 times the absolute value of -5 plus 4 minus 6. So 2 times the absolute value of -1 minus 6. So that's 2 times 1 minus 6. So -4. And then I'll plug in -6. So 2 times the absolute value of -6 plus 4 minus 6. So 2 times the absolute value of -2 minus 6. So 2 times 2 minus 6 would give me -2. Okay, and I'm writing this all down, but hopefully these values are coming, and they might be coming a little bit faster to you. Okay, now I'm going to reflect these around. So the -4 will reflect, and then the -2 will also reflect down. So I just need to go plot those points. -4, -6 is my vertex, so that's where I'm going to start. And then -5, -4. And then -6,-- And then those will reflect around your vertex, and then again you have your V shape. Again, if I look at my domain and range, my domain again is going to be all reals. Again, I have a low point, and that is a y value of -6. So I'm going to say y is greater than or equal to -6. Okay. If I look at 3, same process again, looking for that vertex. So what makes the inside equal to 0? So that would be a value of -9. So that's going to be my vertex. So 2 values smaller will be -10 and -11. 2 values larger would be -8 and -7. So I'm going to go ahead and plug those in. So I've got -9 plus 9 plus 8. Make sure you see that negative on the outside. That does not cancel things. So I have -0 plus 8 just gives me 8. Now if I go ahead and plug in my other 2 values, I've got -10 plus 9 plus 8. So -1 plus 8. So I've got -1 plus 8 is 7. And then I'm going to plug in -11. So I've got -11 plus 9 plus 8. So I've got -2 plus 8 is 6. Now if I'm going to reflect these around, my 7 is going to get matched up 1 across, and then my 6 will get matched up 2 away from that vertex. So -9, -8 is my vertex, so I'll plot that first. Maybe let's go by 2s here, so I can fit this on here. So 2, 4, 6, 8, -9 will be in the middle, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oops, that was +8. 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. 1. And then -10, 7. And then -11, 6. And then that reflects the other direction as well. Okay, so if I look at my domain and range, I've got x equals all reals again. This time mine is opening down and I have a high point of 8. So now my range is going to be less than or equal to my high point of 8. And last but not least, we'll take a look at this absolute value of x minus 7 over 2. So I'll make my xy table. And again, I want to find my vertex first. So I look at that absolute value and I say, what would make that 0? So that would be a value of 7. So that will be my vertex because 7 minus 7 is 0. So then 2 numbers smaller than that would be 6 and 5. 2 numbers bigger than that would be 8 and 9. So if I go ahead and plug in 7, I get absolute value of 7 minus 7 over 2 would be 0 over 2, which would be 0. If I go ahead and plug in 6, I've got 6 minus 7 over 2, which will be absolute value of -1 over 2, which will be 1/2. And then if I plug in 5, I've got absolute value of 5 minus 7 over 2, which is the absolute value of -2 over 2, which is 2 over 2, which is 1. And then I'll reflect these around. So 0.5 is 1 away, and 1 is 2 units away. So if I look at 7, 0, my vertex first, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then I've got 6.5 and 5, 1. And then reflect those around. So just a little bit more gradual of a absolute value. So again, my domain here is going to be all reals, and my low point here is 0. So, and it's going above, so y is greater than or equal to 0. So graphing absolute values. So bring your questions to class tomorrow and get started on your homework.